Hey Reddit, I'm in a rough spot right now and could really use some advice and encouragement to pick myself up and get back on track. Let me lay everything out. For as long as I can remember, 29 years to be exact, it's always been crystal clear that my older brother, Zane, just a year older than me, has been the golden child in our family. Everything seemed to fall in his favor. He knew he was the favorite too, and it went straight to his head. He acted like he was better than everyone else, especially me. No matter what he did, my parents would look the other way, and somehow, I'd end up being the one in trouble. Their soft spot for Zane was obvious. He got the best of everything. Every single time. The only people who ever pointed out how unfair it was were our grandparents or some relatives. Instead of fixing anything, my parents decided to move us 150 miles away from everyone. Their plan was simple. If relatives only saw us on holidays, they wouldn't have to hear criticism anymore. Meanwhile, back at home, Zane made my life miserable. He was physically mean, and my parents did nothing to stop it. My dad would just brush it off with, "Boys will be boys," or tell me to man up. It didn't stop there. When I finally got a girlfriend, Zane turned on the charm and flirted with her until she was so uncomfortable she broke up with me. I was furious. I confronted him and went to my parents for help, but they just laughed and said I was being childish. The unfairness never stopped. On family vacations, guess who always got left behind? Me. My parents would take Zane and tell me they couldn't afford another ticket or that they'd take me next time. But that next time never came. The only real comfort I had was spending time with my grandparents, who I truly loved. But somehow, Zane always got whatever he wanted, no matter the cost. Fast forward to when I turned 16, I finally got my driver's license. My brother, despite being older, couldn't pass his test. Meanwhile, I was flipping burgers at McDonald's, saving up bit by bit. I asked my parents if they could help me get a used car. I even offered to pay them back like a loan, but they flat out said no. Then when Zane finally managed to pass his driving test after countless tries, my parents immediately bought him a car. I was stunned. When I tried talking to them about how unfair that was, all they said was, "Your brother needs it more than you." At 18, after a lot of begging, they finally agreed to get me a car. But Zane stepped in again. He decided his car was too old, even though it was perfectly fine. Just like that, my parents gave me his hand-me-down and bought him a brand new one. It hurt, but I told myself at least I finally had a car, even if I was always second best. The only time my parents ever acted like we were equals was when relatives were around. Birthdays, Christmas, family gatherings, they'd put on a fake show of treating us the same. It was almost laughable watching them work so hard to hide their favoritism when people were watching. They constantly warned me not to talk about family stuff around others. They'd threaten to take away my gadgets if I slipped up. It felt like I was under constant pressure. When Zane finished high school, you'd think he won an Olympic medal. My parents were over the moon bragging about his grades, his future, throwing him a huge party. But when it was my turn to graduate, my mom couldn't even bother showing up on time despite just being home. My dad didn't show up at all. That evening at dinner, I felt crushed. When I brought it up, they brushed me off and said graduating high school wasn't a big deal. To make it worse, Zane, who was off at university, messaged me saying I could never measure up to him, and that it should be obvious by now that our parents didn't really love me that night. I cried myself to sleep. It was harsh, but it hit me no matter what I did. I could never make my parents see me the way I wanted them to. So, I decided enough was enough. I packed up and moved out. You'd think my parents would be upset, but no, they acted relieved, like I was just one less expense. From then on, I was treated like just another relative they'd only see on holidays. Meanwhile, I hustled hard. I worked full-time and managed to get into college with scholarships. My parents didn't contribute a dime. It was tough, but it taught me to stand on my own and stop relying on anyone's approval. When I graduated college, my family didn't show up. They said the drive was too long. Honestly, by then, I wasn't even bothered. After graduation, I got lucky and landed a great job back where I grew up. It paid really well, and life was finally looking up. Zane, on the other hand, didn't have it so easy. He never finished university, too much drinking got in the way. He tried day trading with money our parents gave him every month. At first, he did okay and bragged non-stop about it. But then, he lost everything in one bad trade. You'd think my parents would be furious, but nope. They just brushed it off as a lesson and told Zane to focus on finding a stable job. So he bounced from one job to another until he finally landed one, but it didn't pay anywhere near what mine does. We don't talk much, but whenever we see each other at Christmas, he still tries to act like he's better off than me. Even though it's obvious he isn't, I don't let it bother me. My paycheck speaks for itself. Here's the twist. My dad owns a small manufacturing business. He started from scratch about 5 years ago. Recently, his manager, who was critical to running things, quit for a better offer. My dad, older now and worn out, was struggling to keep the business afloat. Bankruptcy was becoming a real threat. He didn't want to risk hiring an outsider only to train them and then have them leave. So, in a rare move, he called me and Zane to a lunch meeting. Just the three of us. At lunch, my dad didn't waste time. He laid it all out, how desperate the situation was and how badly he needed help. I stayed quiet, even though part of me wanted to step in right away. I could tell he was hoping Zane would rise to the occasion. But Zane's reaction shocked me. He flat out refused, almost mocking the idea. He made it clear he thought the family business was beneath him. Even when my dad practically begged, Zane said no. He claimed leaving his job for something so uncertain wasn't an option. The disappointment on my dad's face said it all. That moment stuck with me. The look of hurt on his face was impossible to miss. It was painful to watch him plead for help, only to be dismissed by my brother. I was floored. I'd always assumed that if my parents ever needed someone to take over the business, it would be Zane. They'd always put him first. But then, out of nowhere, my dad turned to me. His eyes were heavy, stressed, almost pleading, like he was silently begging me to step in. He admitted the business was in serious trouble and said, "I really need you now." At that point, I was doing well for myself, in good money, living on my own and building savings. Deep down, I knew I could throw them a lifeline. Part of me felt like an idiot for even considering it after being left out in the cold for so long. But watching the family business, our legacy collapse, I couldn't stomach that. So I made my choice. Challenge accepted. I jumped in head first, not just dipping a toe, but pouring my savings into reviving the company and steering it back on track. My parents were overwhelmed with gratitude and couldn't stop thanking me. Fast forward 5 years, I was all in. Every ounce of effort went into that business. I built relationships with customers, rebuilt our reputation, and dragged our online presence into the modern era with a proper website that let us sell worldwide. I streamlined paperwork and processes, pushed us toward ISO 9001 standards, and made sure quality was top-notch. And I wasn't just doing the big picture stuff. I was right there on the floor packing boxes. Sweeping, lifting heavy loads during rush seasons, helping wherever I was needed. Meanwhile, my dad was mostly absent. Technology wasn't his thing, so he'd only show up when there was a big order or something urgent. But I was grinding, and because of my blood, sweat, and tears, the business began to thrive. It was worth it. I felt like the superhero of our family business. The company was thriving because I ran it, and for the first time, parents started to respect me in a way they never had before. My grandparents were proud too. For once, favoritism wasn't a factor, was finally seen as a son. Quietly, I believed that one day the business would be mine to run. But I wasn't greedy. If Zane ever wanted to join, I would have been fine sharing it. Then, 3 years ago, something unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, Zane announced he was getting married. None of us even knew he was dating anyone seriously. Turns out, he'd met a woman named Donna just a month earlier, and they decided to marry almost immediately. Red flags went off in my head. They barely knew each other. I tried talking to Zane, suggesting maybe he shouldn't rush into marriage. But he brushed me off, told me to mind my own business, and threw in a jab about how I thought I was all that.
Ow.
Just because I earned more. So I backed off. His life, his choice. But after Zane married Donna, everything changed. Donna didn't get along with our parents. She thought they were too controlling and too involved in his life. so she cut them off completely, ignoring their calls and texts. It crushed my mom, who had always been closest to him. For 2 years, no one knew where Zayn was. It was like he disappeared off the face of the earth. Then, last year, out of nowhere, he came back like nothing had happened. I didn't even know until one strange day when Dad missed an important meeting. I called him, worried, and that's when he told me Zayn was back. Not just visiting, he was home for good. I was stunned. Later that day, Dad said we'd all have dinner because he had big news. At dinner, I finally learned where Zayn had been all that time. His wife Donna had cheated on him and left him for another man. Honestly, I wasn't shocked. Donna always made more money than Zayn, and knowing him, he was never great at keeping a job. My parents, though, were over the moon to have him back, even if it was because of a failed marriage. But that same night, things went from strange to unbelievable. Dad called me and Zayn into his office, closed the door, and looked straight at me. Then he said something I never saw coming: needed to start looking for a new job. They didn't need me anymore. Starting tomorrow, Zayn would be taking my place. I stood there speechless, waiting for someone to laugh or say it was a bad joke. But then Zayn spoke. He said he was ready to take over the family business and work with Dad. Dad just nodded, completely serious. He didn't think he needed me anymore now that Zayn was back. I felt crushed. I had left my own career, poured in my savings, and kept that business alive. I asked why Zayn and I couldn't both work. There was a family business after all, and I was the one who made it grow. But Zayn just laughed and said I was only keeping his seat warm. He told me to grow up and stop whining. I didn't let it slide. I reminded Dad of everything I'd done the years I turned losses into profits. The effort I gave, the sacrifices I made. But Dad didn't budge. He told me flat out that I was just another employee and he had every right to fire me. He even said he was doing me a favor by letting me go immediately. No notice. Period. Desperate. I asked if Mom knew about this, hoping she'd step in. But Dad nodded and said it was her idea too. They both thought this was the only way to keep Zayn around. That's when it hit me. They had used me. When they needed me, I was everything. Now that Zayn was back, I was nothing. I tried one last time, asking for the money I'd put into the business so I could start fresh. But Dad and Zayn exploded. Zayn said, I was out of line for even asking, throwing in that our parents had already spent so much on me growing up. Dad backed him up, saying I chose to put that money in and should be ashamed for asking it back. Zayn called me ungrateful, and I snapped. I yelled that they had no idea what it was like growing up in my shoes, always compared to Zayn, always second best. I reminded them I saved the business. And now they thought I was wrong for wanting my own money back. That's when Dad lost it. He shouted that I was ungrateful and would get nothing. He even said he was cutting me out of his will because I was greedy. Then he told me to leave the house. It felt like a punch to the gut. Everything I thought I'd earned, every dream I had of running the business, it all shattered. My own father was telling me I didn't deserve a thing. I held myself together and told him, fine, keep the business. Keep the money. I'd start from scratch and prove him wrong. Then I walked out without looking back. They didn't call, didn't text, nothing. Later, my grandparents found out about everything, how Zayn had vanished, come back, and taken over while I was shoved aside. They were furious with my parents, but by then, the damage was done. It's been 6 months since I walked away. I cut off contact with my family completely. Starting over wasn't easy. I felt alone, lost, and heartbroken, but also determined to build something of my own. Finding a job at first was rough. I wasn't used to working regular jobs after running our family business, but I knew I was good at what I did. Then I got an idea. I went straight to the companies that used to be our biggest rivals. I told them how I had managed and grown our business, and how I could do the same for them. Part of me wanted revenge, but part of me also wanted to prove my worth. To my surprise, some companies were actually interested. I knew I had skills, but it felt good to have others recognize it too. I started getting interview calls, and each one felt like stepping on a stage, but in a good way. And then, one company decided to take a chance on me. They offered me a job and I was over the moon. It felt like I was starting a brand new phase in my life. I was ready to give it everything I had. The job was tough and came with plenty of challenges, but I handled them with the same drive I once had when I fought to save our family business from falling apart. Slowly, piece by piece, I began putting my life back together. It was like picking up the scattered pieces of a puzzle and finally seeing the full picture come together, only this time, without the constant stress and negativity from my family. For the first time in a long while, I felt good about myself. My job was going great, I felt stable, and I was genuinely happy. It was like being given a second chance to discover what I was really capable of, and everything seemed to be falling into place. Then, out of nowhere, my parents decided to show up in my life again. Just last week, they started blowing up my phone with calls and texts non-stop. At first, I ignored them, thinking they'd eventually stop. But they didn't. They kept at it, determined to get through to me. Curiosity finally got the better of me, and I picked up to see what they wanted after all this time. When I answered, their voices were filled with worry, and without even a hello or an apology, they went straight into asking if I could help pay their bills because their electricity had been cut off. I was stunned. No, how are you? No, we've missed you? Just straight to money? I kept calm and told them to ask their successful son instead. I made it clear I didn't want to be disturbed again. That's when my mom broke down crying on the phone, and finally, they told me the truth. Things had gotten really bad. The family business, once our pride, was on the verge of bankruptcy. Then Dad laid it out, he and Mom had lost everything. They had put almost all their savings and retirement money into cryptocurrency and day trading earlier this year. Zane had convinced them it was a smart move, that they'd triple their money. But the market crashed, and they lost it all in a scam. On top of that, Zane was running the business into the ground. He couldn't manage the employees who hated working for him. He had no idea how to run things. I felt a strange mix of sadness and irony. Important clients. For years, my parents treated me like I didn't matter. They pushed me out of the business, cut me off from inheritance, and told me I wasn't worth anything. But now that everything had fallen apart, suddenly they expected me to save them. I reminded them of how badly they had treated me, how they never paid me back for the money I invested to keep the business alive. I told them how I worked day and night to make it successful, even when they only saw me as just another worker. Their nerve to come asking now really got to me, so I took a deep breath, calmed myself, and told them the truth. I hadn't forgotten what they did to me, and they shouldn't expect me to come running back. They tried guilt-tripping me, saying I owed them for raising me and that I should be a better son. But I stood my ground. I reminded them of everything I had done for them and for the business, despite how they treated me. Then I laid it out clearly. If they ever reached out again asking for help, I'd take legal steps to make them pay me back every penny I'd invested. And if it came down to it, I'd even push them to sell their house to settle things. Of course, that didn't sit well. My parents were furious, and we had a huge fight. But no matter how much they yelled or tried to guilt-trip me, I didn't budge. I told them flat out I wasn't going to help after everything they'd done. Standing up for myself like that felt like a turning point. It was unbelievable that after years of treating me like second best, they thought I'd just forget it all and come running the moment they snapped their fingers. When I hung up, I knew I had made the right choice. But it didn't end there. My phone blew up again, this time with messages and calls from Zane and other relatives. They said I was being too hard on my parents and should just let the past go to help them out. Not everyone agreed, though. My grandparents were firmly on my side. They always knew the truth. When I was a kid, I spent so much time with my grandparents because my parents were always too busy doing their own thing. They saw everything, the favoritism, the neglect. They knew it all, and still, it's been a roller coaster. Now everyone looks at me like I'm the bad guy for not swooping in to save the day after everything. But am I really the villain for finally choosing to protect my peace after all these years? First, I just want to say thank you. Seriously, your support and kindness through this rough patch have been incredible. Every message, every comment, every word of encouragement has been a lifeline. It's hard to explain how much it means. But please know I'm beyond grateful. Here's the truth. My family's business has been in serious trouble. And the twist is, my brother was actually at the center of it. But when my parents needed help, they didn't tell the truth. They spun a story that made it look like Zane was the hero stepping in during hard times. And when I refused to pay their bills, they twisted things again. To save Zane's reputation, they painted me as the villain to the whole family. My own parents threw me under the bus to protect him. It felt like the biggest betrayal. For a while, I stayed quiet. I thought maybe that's just how it had to be. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized it wasn't right. I shouldn't have to carry blame for something I didn't do. After a lot of reflection and deep talks with my grandparents, who've been my rock, I decided it was time to set the record straight. This weekend, I plan to speak up with my extended family, to tell them the truth about the years of unfair treatment, how I was pushed out of the business, how I invested my own money to save it and never got a cent back. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew I had to do it. For too long, I let others control the story. Now, it was my turn. This morning, I took a big step. I sent out a massive email to all my relatives, the same people who kept wondering why I wasn't around while my parents claimed they were struggling. I laid it all out. How I was treated growing up, how obvious the favoritism was, how I was shoved out of the business and cut off from any inheritance. I explained how much of my own money I poured into saving the company, only to be tossed aside the second Zane came back. Writing it wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I needed them to hear it from me. And honestly, hitting send felt like dropping a backpack full of rocks I'd been carrying for years. I felt free. I don't know how everyone will react. Some may believe me, some may not, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that I finally told my truth, no sugarcoating. 3 months later, the response shocked me. A lot of relatives reached out, apologizing and admitting they had no idea how bad things had been. For once, I felt understood. Some of them even confronted my parents, which I know didn't go over well. My uncle on my parents' side lashed out, calling me childish for airing family laundry. That was the last straw. I sent him one final message saying I was completely done. I even told him I wouldn't lose sleep if my parents ended up without a roof over their heads. And if they didn't respect my wish for no contact, I'd take legal action. Then I blocked him. Since then, silence and honestly, it's been blissful. Meanwhile, life's been moving forward. Work is going great, and I've been focusing on healing. I even started therapy, which has been huge in helping me process the past. My grandparents remain my rock. Visit them whenever I can, and they're the true meaning of family to me, so again, thank you. Your support has been everything. It's helped me move toward a better, happier life. Here's to healing, to joy in the small things, and to brighter days ahead.